Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and it is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week. This week in data breaches, quite frankly, is probably karma for me because the last week in data breaches, just quite frankly, was really short. So here we go. Strap yourselves in. Let's dive in. And as always, I want to thank with the people that sent me a lot of this information. And that would be Donald Horch, JP Ferris, Sarah Grant, Jose Rodriguez, and Manny Hotunaka. So with that, let's dive in and head over to Italy because quite frankly, they've got a big problem with a private investigation agency apparently that has been hacking the country. So according to prosecutors in Milan, the data of at least 800,000 Italians was compromised in breaches dating from 2022 and executed by this private investigative agency that was compiling dossiers for a fee on top Italian figures in business and politics. Now, prosecutors are still investigating which of those officials had been targeted. Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani described the breach as a quote-unquote threat to democracy, while the opposition Democratic Party called on Premier Giorgia Meloni to address Parliament about this data breach and the protection measures, because who knows what they were selling, who they were selling this to. Now, 4 people are under house arrest in Italy as a result of this, including Carmine Gallo, who is a former law enforcement official, and he was running this agency that essentially is the focus of the probe, and he is also one of the alleged hackers or lead hacker in this case. Another 20 people, including prominent business people, are under investigation as of a few days ago in Italy. So obviously this is a big scandal, for Italy, the Italian government, and prominent leaders. So good luck to everybody there. Moving on. Let's talk about Team Software. On October 24th, they filed with Massachusetts after discovering an unauthorized party was able to access sensitive information about them. Now, in this notice, Team Software explained that sensitive information was hit, names, social security numbers, and medical information. Team Software is sending out letters to those affected. So heads up to you, if you work for Team Software, you might have been hit. Moving on, let's talk about Landmark. Now, this is a Texas-based company that provides third-party administrative solutions for life insurance carriers. Approximately 800,000 users there were exposed in a breach. And according to their filing with Maine, an unauthorized party gained access to sensitive information. Usual suspects are name, address, social security number, driver's license, state IDs, passport numbers, bank account and routing info, medical information, health insurance policy numbers, dates of birth, and life and annuity policy information. Landmark also essentially is an issue or sending these things out. They noticed this breach on May 14th, and by virtue of that, we now have a supply chain hit because Liberty Bankers Insurance Group, who uses Landmark, has already declared. So I think we'll be talking about Landmark for quite some time. Moving on. Let's talk about Free. That's Free. They apparently are a French telecommunications company and the second largest internet service provider in the entire country. So they are big in France. Now, they disclosed a cyber attack basically that they fell victim to over basically the past weekend. And this is the latest in line of attacks against internet service providers and telcos across the region. Now, a threat actor stole information from the company's internal management tool, gathered data on company subscribers, and then attempted to sell that data on the dark web in a cybercrime forum. And this is basically confirmed by the ISP, the Internet Service Provider, talking to Agence France, the press, AFP, in the country. Now, the hacker, known as Drusel X, posted a message on the forum putting 2 databases stolen from Free up for auction. The databases reportedly contain information on more than 19 million customer accounts and more than 5 million international bank account details as well. So if you're French and you're using Free for all your internet needs, you're definitely going to want to check in. Moving on, let's talk about CUSO Financial Services. On October 28th, they filed with Maine after discovering a third-party service provider basically got hit and then unauthorized access to CUSO employees and et cetera, et cetera. Now, in this notice, CUSO explained that the incident resulted in an authorized party being able to access sensitive information. I do not have that list, but CUSO is sending out letters to the 75,116 individuals impacted. So if you use CUSO Financial Services, heads up to you. Moving on. Let's talk about Solient Health. On October 29, they filed with Maine after discovering an attacker was able to gain access to an employee email account. Sensitive information was hit. Name, social security numbers, and government-issued IDs are being declared as breach. Soliant began sending out notifications also, so heads up to you. Moving on, let's go to St. Xavier University. They filed with Maine on October 30th after discovering unauthorized actor downloaded certain files from the school's computer network. In this notice, Xavier explained that the incident resulted in an unauthorized party gaining information, names, social security number, and financial account information was breached, and Xavier is now sending out notices to those affected, which is 212,262 individuals. So if you matriculated at Xavier or still are, you might want to give them a shout. Moving on, let's talk about Select Blinds. I think I've seen their commercials since I was like a kid. Anyway, October 31st, Halloween, Select Blinds filed with Maine. Good time to do it because nobody's paying attention to the news, but I am. Here we are. Anyway, they filed with Maine, saying they were targeted for a cyber attack back in January of 2024, and essentially Select Blinds said that unauthorized consumer information was hit. I do not have a list of that, but Select Blinds is sending out notices. So if you use Select Blinds for all your blind needs, here we are. Moving on, Bort Longyear, and I originally read that as Borat, but obviously not. So Boart, Longyear, not sure what they do. Anyway, on October 23rd, they filed with Montana after discovering an authorized actor gained access to files in their system. Now, in this notice, Bort Longyear explained that the incident resulted in sensitive data getting hit, names, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, government IDs, passport numbers, medical information, financial account information, and Bort Longyear, whatever they do, don't know, they're sending out notifications, so if you're using them for all your longs, your years, or your borts, heads up. Moving on, Bright Star Care on October 28th, they filed with Massachusetts after discovering an employee account was compromised. I do not have a list of the sensitive information, but they are claiming sensitive information was hit, and Bright Star is sending out notices as well. Moving on, Mystic Valley sounds like a pretty cool place. Elder Services on October 22nd, they filed with Maine after discovering an unauthorized party had accessed their computer network, and they do list the data that was hit: names, dates of birth, passport, financial account, payment card numbers, that's great, online portal, social security numbers, driver's license, health insurance information, and medical information as well. Mystic Valley basically is now sending out notices, so if you use them for your elder services, heads up. Moving on, let's head on down to Peru and talk about Interbank, previously known as the International Bank of Peru. Now, they confirmed a data breach after a threat actor hacked into their systems and then started leaking their data online. Quote, "We have identified that some data of a group of clients has been exposed by a third party without our authorization. In light of the situation, we immediately deployed additional security measures to protect the operations and information of our clients." So heads up to you if you use Interbank, formerly the International Bank of Peru. Starkweather and Shepley Insurance Brokerage sounds very British. I think we're here in the United States because on October 24th, they filed with Massachusetts after discovering an unauthorized party was able to gain access to their information. Sensitive data was hit. They do not list it. And Starkweather began sending out notifications as well. Moving on. One Point Patient Care on October 24th, they filed with Texas after discovering an unauthorized actor was able to gain access to portions of their company network. In this notice, they explained sensitive information was indeed hit: name, social security, residence information, medical record numbers, and diagnosis and prescription information was breached. They filed with Health and Human Services, declaring 795,916 people in that total. So heads up to you if you use One Point Patient Care. Moving on, Summit Pathology in Colorado. They basically also filed with Health and Human Services that 1,813,538 patients suffered a cyber attack in April of 2024, and we all didn't know about it until recently, meaning the last week or so. Summit Pathology said suspicious activity was identified on April 18th, and here we are. I have no other information on this whatsoever, but if you're one of the over 1.8 million people that use Summit Pathology in scenic Colorado or wherever they are, you might want to check in. Moving on. Advanced Recovery Equipment and Supplies on October 18th. They filed with Health and Human Services, basically as an unauthorized party was able to get into their network essentially in 2023. That's right, about a year ago or so. Now, the incident resulted in sensitive information getting hit, names, social security numbers, dates of birth, driver's license numbers, state IDs, credit debit card, usernames, passwords, medical information, health insurance information, and Advanced Recovery Equipment and Supplies is sending out notices as well. So if you've got advanced recovery equipment or supplies, heads up. Moving on, ATSG, which apparently is an IT services company in the state of New York. On October 4th, they filed with Health and Human Services and basically saying they experienced a data breach affecting 909,469. I'm guessing they're a software developer. Now, this report indicates that the breach basically involved unsecured protected health information. Don't have more than that. ATSG will soon be sending out notices also. So heads up, if your healthcare company uses ATSG for IT services. Moving on. The Center for Urban Community Services, or actually, to be perfectly fair, they could actually have access to all these hospitals and patient records, and by virtue of that, the attackers leverage them to get into a whole bunch of medical facilities. That could also be it, as opposed to software development. Now, let's move on to the Center for Urban Community Services, or CUCS. On October 11th, they filed with Health and Human Services. Unauthorized actor basically was in their network for several days in September of 2023. They explained the incident resulted in sensitive data getting hit. We're talking names, social security numbers, telephone numbers, dates of birth, benefit identification numbers, health information, and prescription information. CUCS, or the Center for Urban Community Services, is sending out notices. Moving on, let's talk about the money transfer giant known as MoneyGram. This is actually an update. I talked about them a few months ago, something like that, where they had a data breach. They're one of the largest money movement institutions on the planet. Now, they just replaced their chief executive less than a month after confirming that attackers did indeed steal a ton of personal data from their customers. And here we are. Now, in a statement this past Monday, MoneyGram said that it has now appointed Anthony Suhu as the chief's executive in the immediate effect. Now, Suhu replaces Alex Holmes, who joined MoneyGram in 2009 and served as its CFO, then its COO, and then he was appointed its CEO in 2016. Holmes will remain on as an advisor on the boards, on the company's the board of directors, and here we are. But that's what happens in a data breach. Heads typically roll. Usually it's the CISO, but in this case, the CEO took one for the team, which, quite frankly, that's what a CEO should do. And with that, let's dive into our mini segment simply entitled, If You Just Paid Money or Spent Money on Cybersecurity, You Wouldn't Be Getting Breached, You Wouldn't Be Losing Your Reputation, You Wouldn't Be Paying Fines. And so with that, let's talk about Merit Healthcare Advisors, because a federal judge in Connecticut has given final approval to an over $1.5 million class action settlement involving a data breach at Merit Healthcare Advisors. About 3,320 people whose personal information was accessed by an unauthorized party and exposed during March of 2023 have opted basically into the class and will receive payment. The attorneys naturally will get over $500,000 because that's how attorneys roll. Moving on, Albany ENT and Allergy Services. I remember talking about them a while ago. They had just agreed to pay $500,000 and spend $2.25 million on bolstering its cybersecurity over the next 5 years for failing to protect private medical information. This is according to New York Attorney General Letitia James, announcing it this past Tuesday. So heads up to you, Albany ENT and Allergy Services. Basically, next up is the Philadelphia Inquirer, the publication. A federal judge granted preliminary approval of a $525,000 class settlement in a proposed class action accusing the Philadelphia Inquirer of inadequate security practices that led to a data breach in May of 2023. The preliminary settlement granted by the judge on October 25th requires the newspaper to create a $525,000 non-reversionary settlement fund, which I'm assuming they can't get the money back, which will be used to pay for administrative expenses, taxes, and any fee award and costs, according to the filing in the District Court of Eastern Pennsylvania. So here we are. Moving on, CrowdStrike. And we all knew this one was coming. CrowdStrike. Okay, on October 23rd, 5, Delta Airlines, yes, the major airlines here in the United States, filed a lawsuit against CrowdStrike for gross negligence, international misrepresentation, computer trespassing, breach of contract, and on and on and on. Remember, as a result of this breach, Delta had to cancel over 7,000 flights, which cost them millions. I remember that day. I actually was sitting in O'Hare Airport trying to go from Chicago to Raleigh, North Carolina, and got delayed on American, and got delayed. So I was just doing nothing but like sitting there tweeting out memes on CrowdStrike. But also understand this, Delta was down for days. That happened on a Friday. And by virtue of that, by that Wednesday, 5 days later, Delta was still struggling to get back online. These kinds of things are a shared responsibility. One, obviously CrowdStrike screwed the pooch. Nobody is denying that whatsoever. But two, this really underscores a lack of resiliency and contingency planning on Delta's watch. And if Delta had been completely ransomed out, which would have knocked everything out too, they probably would have had an even worse problem, because this was a relatively easy fix, though a manual one for a lot of organizations. And for the record, American Airlines was up in something like 2 hours. So I was only delayed, but I got where I was supposed to go. So take that for what it's worth. But those were essentially your lawsuits and fines of the week. And if any of them had just actually spent more on cybersecurity, apparently included, well, CrowdStrike was more development, they wouldn't be getting sued, they wouldn't be having their reputations ruined, and hopefully you weren't flying Delta that week. Moving on. Let's go back to regular breaches and talk about seafood wholesaler True World Group. Now, they self-reported a data breach to Maine, and Maine has particularly strict data breach notification laws. If you're a longtime listener and follower of mine, you have heard me say Maine, Massachusetts, Montana, Texas, California, and some others constantly, so Maine is there. I don't know anything else at the moment. I couldn't find more info on this, but True World Group, who's a major seafood wholesaler here in the United States, possibly Canada, is on the chopping block in Maine. We'll see what happens. You know, I'll keep you updated. Moving on, let's talk about Transact. Now, this is a firm providing crypto on-ramp services. They reported a breach impacting over 92,000 users as a result of phishing. Now, the compromised data includes personal information. We're talking names, birth dates, driver's license, ID, selfies, and essentially that 92,000 is actually 92,554, or roughly 1.14% of Transact's entire user base. Transact clarified that no financial data was compromised in the breach, and according to the company, no email addresses, phone numbers, passwords, credit card information, social security numbers, or financial records were actually affected. So heads up to you if you use Transact for your on-ramping of crypto stuff. Moving on. Indian real estate marketplace known as No Broker. Now, they reportedly were held ransom after a data breach on October 30th. The attacker group known as Kill Security claimed that they breached No Broker and accessed vital information, including, according to Kill Security, names, addresses, PAN numbers, financial data or transaction amounts for stamp duty and registration fees, legal agreements for non-residential property usage, and consent for Aadhaar-based verification. That's the national database in India, including biometric data as well. So if you're in India and you're using No Broker for your real estate needs, you absolutely want to check in. And finally, and we have one finally for you here. And basically, for the record, I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Nathan over at Tech Time Radio, where I'm a regular correspondent, if you will, on Tech Time Radio, on top of my own radio show, et cetera, because we recently had a conversation on the air that you can go watch like a month ago about how you should not be using TP-Link products. And he mentioned that he had some to monitor his American chickens, I guess, in his backyard. A lot of people have chickens. Nathan does too. So with that, Nathan, I want you to listen to this very specifically, because hackers working on behalf of the Chinese government were using botnets, or I should say are using botnets of thousands of routers, cameras, and other internet-connected devices to perform highly evasive password spraying attacks against users of Microsoft's Azure Cloud Service. This is according to essentially the company. Now, the malicious network made up almost entirely of TP-Link routers was first documented in October 2023 by a researcher who named it Botnet 7777. Now, the geographically dispersed collection of more than 16,000 compromised devices, again, mostly TP-Link, at its peak got its name because it exposes malicious software on port 7777. If you didn't know, there are 65,500 ports on a public IPv4 address. Now, multiple reports said that Botnet 7777 basically was being used to skillfully perform password spraying, a form of attack, for the record, that sends a large number of login attempts to many different IP addresses. Now, because each individual device limits the login attempts, the carefully coordinated account takeover campaign is really hard to detect by the targeted service. Now, on Thursday, Microsoft reported that Covert Network 1658, that's the name that Microsoft is using to track the botnet, is being used by multiple Chinese threat actors in an attempt to compromise targeted Microsoft Azure accounts. The company said the attack is quote-unquote highly evasive because the botnet, now estimated at about 8,000 strong on average, takes pains to conceal its malicious activity. Now, some of the characteristics that make this really difficult are: one, they're using basically like small office, home office type IP addresses. On top of it, the use of rotating IP addresses at any given time. So in other words, they're using one device on an IP address and they're switching to another in a coordinated manner. And they've got thousands of these, make it a lot harder to track. And so by virtue of that, the average uptime for the Covert Network 1658 node is approximately 90 days, which is a long time in the Microsoft world. So that's obviously a huge issue. On top of it, the low volume password spraying process. So for example, monitoring for multiple failed sign-in attempts from one IP address or one account will not detect this activity. But when you're rotating addresses and accounts and all this, and just this constantly churning this out slowly and slowly and slowly until you break in, it's much harder to detect on the threat detection side. And so with that, if you're using TP-Link routers or anything that's publicly exposed, and you might be using it with your internet service provider to monitor your chickens, whatever you're doing with it, Nathan, you shouldn't be using it. So make sure you're getting rid of those TP-Link anything. And quite frankly, you're just giving the Chinese intelligence firms access to whatever they want, including monitoring chickens, apparently. So heads up to you. Those were your breaches of the week. Nathan, you know what to do. And with that, thank you very much. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everybody.